My name is Alex Rosenberg, and I've been a member of the Appraisers Association of America since 1986.
I'm thrilled to begin this Masters series with Alex Rosenberg. Alex, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure to be here.
Alex, tell me, how did you become an appraiser?
In 1985, there was a famous case, Hunter versus the IRS. It involved Marlboro, Christie's, and a number of other galleries. It was the determining case of the tax shelter in prints. And I was called as the expert on the value of prints. And because I had been a publisher of prints, I was challenged by the court by not having any expertise. And Judge Jacobs in tax court said, I will accept him as an expert because I've been to his gallery and I know that he knows his stuff. So after the case, I went up to the U.S. attorney and I said, why did you challenge me? He says, you have no credentials. I says, what do you mean credentials? He says, nobody certified you. You don't have any standing. You don't even belong to an organization. So here was I, an expert witness before I was an appraiser. So I ran out immediately and I asked him, what organizations are there? He said, well, you got the American Society of Appraisers. So the next day I joined the American Society of Appraisers. And because of my history, I was accepted as a certified member without ever having taken any courses or anything. That is how I became an appraiser.
Tell me about a couple of the things that you really love about being an appraiser.
It's less common now, but for years I used to love writing methodology. If I had a case and the existing rules couldn't win for me, then I changed the rules and I would fight with IRS with new rules. And very often you would win because they had no fixed idea either. They only knew they were in opposition. It took a long time before there was understanding, and even at the beginning of USPAP, there was no solid basis for appraising.
Tell me the most interesting object or assignment you've ever worked on or object you've appraised.
Most interesting case I ever had was the Rosenberg case versus the IRS. In the early 1960s, Rosenberg had visited Jean Tinguely in Switzerland and had bought a piece of sculpture from him, actually bought it. Neither of them knew that that piece was going to be the prototype for Tinguely's fame. Up until then, most of Tinguely's were vertical, and this was the first real horizontal one that ran across back and forth, back and forth. Rosenberg then did the typical Rosenberg. He had it created, sent to the United States, and for 26 years it was at Circa, unopened. MoMA knew that he had the piece, and he was given a dinner honoring him at MoMA, and the director asked him if he'd donate the piece, which he gladly said he would. I was asked by the accountant, what did I think it was worth? The worst tradition of appraising, I looked at it and said, it's probably worth $1 million, $1.25 million. He said, I don't need that much. I only need about $800,000. So we'll value at $800,000, we'll have no problem with the government. Problem was that the government hired a case appraiser, didn't do it themselves. And this person looked and looked and couldn't find a sale, not recognizing that these large pieces were all commissions, that you never find one at auction. So she said, well, if that piece is this big and then the one sold at auction this big, therefore, this should be worth about $400,000. We got into a big scrap, and finally we went to mediation. You know, IRS takes these men who are in their last year of service before retiring, and they act as mediators. And he turned around to her, and I remember he said, lady, if I were you, I would settle. I thought she would go through the roof. Rosenberg refused to settle because he had spent $135,000. So finally, IRS took the case out of the art panel's hands, and it went over to a deputy commissioner who only wanted to know, how do we get out of this? And Rosenberg would only take his $135,000. And they said, but we don't pay punitive damages. And I said, but yes, you do. So finally, we prevailed on Rosenberg to take $50,000. back from his 135. And this became the first time that an object was allowed to pass for more than its appraised value.
Wow.
So that was the most important case I ever handled.
Alex, what has it meant to you to be a member of the Appraisers Association?
It meant a lot to me because originally I was a member of ASA. I was on the Personal Property Committee very quickly. I was on the Board of Examiners. But it was such a political organization that I quickly switched over to AAA, my activities there. I found the people at AAA to be far more friendly, and gradually, it took time, but gradually AAA surpassed ASA as the important personal property organization. The thing I've liked most was the congeniality of the membership, the fact that I could get help, that I could give help. It's a fairly democratic organization, whereas other organizations tend to be very inward.
In your recollection, the most favorite or interesting actual object you've ever appraised or worked with?
It was, believe it or not, the first major job I ever got. When I became certified, being very proud, I sent out a letter to about 4,000 lawyers in New York telling them that I was here, and received no replies. Finally, I got one reply, and this involved an old Aeolian organ that was up in Williamsport. I didn't know those days that the organ in the house has no value, because if you take it out of the house and reconstruct it, it will cost more money than the organ's worth. So that actually it should have been appraised before the house was donated, not after the house was donated. So I took the job, and I went up, and I don't know if you have any idea what a 1928 Aeolian organ looked like. It was enormous. It covered maybe 40, 50 feet. And I found an old man who, believe it or not, had worked on this kind of organ. So he pressed upon me how he was going to charge me a lot of money because this was a big job, and he charged $500 to go from Boston out to Williamstown. Finally, we appraised it. But the important thing out of that job was I always remembered something I've never forgotten. When you think of taking a job, always be sure you know how you're going to get out of it. Getting in is easy. How do you get out? When I was closing the gallery, the world was changing, and I was unprepared for art as a commodity. I just didn't know how to deal with it. I decided I would be an appraiser. I also had thousands of pieces of art from the gallery, and I figured that between selling the art and doing the appraising, I could live the rest of my life, and I have.
A long life as well.
Well, I'm running out of art.